Hi, Miss Simone. Thank you so
Hi.
much for coming in, and thanks so much for letting me come in and watch you teach. It was really a pleasure to come in your classroom, and I appreciate you being willing. I know you've had a chance to look at the data, and I'd just like to start by asking you, given your recollections of the lesson and given your chance to look at the data, what are some things that captured your attention?
Well, one of the things that really captured my attention, which I was not aware of except through the data that you gave me, was the number of times I said shh to students. I mean, I must have sounded like a train to them, going shh, shh, shh all the time. But it looks to me like I said shh about 12 or 15 times during the teaching, and it was only about a 15 or 20 minute observation.
Right.
So that was one thing that really was enlightening, and I really wasn't too happy with.
So let's start there and dismantle that just a little bit. So we're here, and I see you're scrolling through, and I'm glad that you were able to look at these data, and you're looking at the area particularly in 2C.
Right.
And so when we look at those 2C procedures, and your recollection is, and seeing the data show that you said shh a number of times. What about that strategy's effectiveness? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, it couldn't have been very effective if I had to keep saying it again and again. Because, as I said, there were way more evidence of the fact that I said that than I ever thought I did. I didn't realize that I did that so much with the students. And as I look at it, I really didn't say anything but shh in terms of helping them to be quiet when I wanted them
as
to be
an
quiet.
attention
As an
getter.
attention move. That was the only one I used, was shh.
So the shh seemed to be your go-to attention getter. And so let's talk about that for a moment. What might be some other options? If your thought is that shh is not effective, and it felt like it wasn't effective, what might be some other options for you to use?
Well, I do want you to know they're a pretty chatty class, so it has been difficult to come up with some other ways of making them be quiet and not be so talkative.
So the talkative nature of the students feels like it prompts you to go to that shh. So I'm going to just describe, Ms. Simone, some strategies that other teachers, I always say I'm so lucky. I get a chance to go and watch teachers all around the world teach, and I steal good ideas from some teachers and then share them, and I'm going to steal some of your good teaching ideas, like having the grandma in the classroom helping out, and such a great strategy. But I also have the benefit of seeing some other good ideas that are utilized. And I'm just going to give you a couple that I've seen and heard of. And one of them is using kind of a non-verbal or a sign language, either the non-verbal without the train noise, as you say, or the flat tire sound, or this. And in sign language, this means stop.
Oh, okay.
And so to be able to do that, if your students understand, your first graders understand that is stop in sign language. So that's one technique. Another technique, since you have a chatty class, and they seem to like to work with one another, maybe building on that and having them share with each other when they see each other making noise, doing the nonverbal signal or wouldn't they like to do the sign language for stop? And then the third one is a technique that I've seen in several schools and school districts, and it's a call and response, where I might say something like, class, class, and then the students answer, yes, yes.
Oh.
Something like that gets their attention. But then, of course, after the yes, yes, the expectation needs to be, after you say yes, yes, we get quiet. So I've just given you just a few ideas. What's your hunch about which of those might kind of work or mesh with your own personality style?
Well, as I think about that class, I really like that, because that is a verbal thing that I can use with them. And then maybe I could use two of them. I mean, actually do the class, but show them the nonverbal. They would like that for each other, and encourage them, especially maybe in their small groups. Does that make sense?
Oh.
To use that in there with each other when they're talking about something other than they should be doing.
So the notion might be that you might use class, yes, yes in whole group, but also using the nonverbal for them to do that for each other, even when you're in small groups, when you're not available.
Right. Like when I'm walking around to the other groups.
Given that thought, what's your hunch about what might happen?
Well, first I'd have to teach them to do that, and do that really carefully. And then,
really great.
And we'd have to practice. But with the class and yes, yes, we'd have to practice that too, to make sure that works. But I would like to try the class, yes, yes first, and then maybe add on the other strategy for them to use, if that makes sense.
One for
me and one for you.
Yes, yes, a kind of a combination. And since you do have that chatty class, or that class that like to work with each other, maybe those strategies might be worth using. So one of the things, and I know we've been doing the book study on Teach Like a Champion, and Doug Lemov has so many strategies, right? And I know that in past times that I've been in your classroom where you use the everyone writes, that when it's time to think, we're going to think first, but then everyone writes. And I've really enjoyed seeing that strategy come to play. There is another one that we haven't talked about in depth, and it's here. It's strategy 50, and it's called Do It Again. And I think you alluded to it a little bit, but would you mind just reading that?
Sure.
Because I do have my glasses. What does that say?
Not just telling them to do it again, but to do it differently, or but doing it better, and striving to do their best.
What would that look like in your class, especially with the class, yes, yes?
Well, I bet the first time we practice it, not everybody would say yes, yes. Another thing they might do is, I could say class, they could say yes, yes, and in 10 seconds later, they're back talking again. And so we have to practice that part,
and
too.
So we have to get better. How do we get better? In what ways can we get better at the class, yes, yes?
You know what? I could even video the class. And the class could look at what they're doing and see what they're doing after they say yes, yes. And we could say, look at what happened this time. You went right back to talking.
So isn't that an interesting thought? You and I are talking about the 30,000 foot level. What do we as educators do for our students? But you're thinking there might be some benefit from them actually watching
what they're doing
and how effective that strategy is, and maybe what happens if we keep having to do or even a good strategy like class, yes, if we keep having to do that, do they realize that so much instructional time is lost?
And they don't get to do their clocks like they really want to in the end anyway.
Exactly.
Right.
And that, I think that was evident in 3C, when we looked at 3C, that there wasn't as much time.
To actually do the project that I wanted them to do to obtain that outcome.
And that they would want to do, right? And so, and I think that's a really great notion. So going back to the 2C for a moment, and we just talked about a really important principle of practice also, and that is that if our classroom procedures are in place and working well, there's more time for 3C, the student engagement, to take place.
Right.
So one begets the other. And the students figuring that out on their own from the video.
That might be really interesting to take a look at that.
I really like that idea. I'm stealing that one as well. So let's just take a look. I know that you have the evaluation tool and have used it in depth before. This top row being the kind of the descriptor of 2C at each of the levels of performance.
Right.
Given the data from 2C, just from this snapshot, and that we know, we've talked about that as well. That's all it is. It's just a snapshot of our teaching. Given the snapshot of your teaching in 2C, if you had to reflect on a level of performance, where do you think that evidence most fits?
Well, the reality is much instructional time was lost.
You're reading this first sentence at the ineffective level.
Yeah, because we did not have time to do as much time to do the clock project as I wanted. However, I would also say that there's a little bit of the emerging in there too, in that when I did guide and prompt them, they did get back to work and get done what they were supposed to be doing. But the routines weren't as established as I would really like them to be. So it's kind of in between ineffective and emerging.
So, and I think that's a really important point to think about, that some pieces are here and some pieces are here. And so what do we want to do is push that practice over here.
I want to push it way over here for sure.
I'd like
to have less instructional time lost, Yes. And I think that just in terms of relationship building with the kids, it would be better as well if I don't have to keep correcting and prompting. So, and then we would obviously get them to be more engaged. So I'm really
and again,
would like to work
yes,
toward
revisiting that 2C begets 3C. That the managing the routines and procedures really will, if done at a higher level, will also impact the level of engagement.
Right.
So, Ms. Simone, I want to just thank you again for spending some time. But before we finish up, I'd just like to ask, what are a couple of big takeaways that you're taking away from our conversation and our experience together?
Well, without the data, if you had just shown me this,
the levels of performance,
I would have thought I was up here. So one of my takeaways is that I really need to work on this area. And I guess I know that because I do get frustrated with the amount of talking that's going on in the class. So that helped clarify that and give me a goal on which